So hello everyone. Thank you for being here and welcome to the November 2024 edition of our webinar series. This is Succession Planning and Physician Recruitment. It is never too early to start with Jill Maher. And just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. So this webinar, all of our webinars are recorded, available on demand on YouTube, as well as eversightvision.org. Please keep an eye on your inboxes for more webinars coming up this year. Next month on December 5th, we have a talk with Dr. Asim Farouk of University of Chicago on antibody drug conjugates and their implications on the ocular surface. All participants are muted throughout the duration of the webinar, but please do ask questions. You can do so at any point by using the Q&A button at the bottom of either your phone, tablet, or laptop. And so please answer or ask questions. They'll be answered at the conclusion of our talk. And so now a brief introduction of tonight's speaker. Jill Maher is the principal consultant and owner of Maher Medical Practice Consulting located in Chicago. She consults with medical practices and teaching institutions. Her expertise includes physician and administrator recruitment, strategic planning, financial analysis, marketing, leadership training, team building, business development, and overall practice efficiency. She is particularly well-versed in physician recruitment and strategic planning. She has more than 25 years of experience in healthcare and industry, working with Fortune 100 companies, extensive experience with sales management and national accounts, including more than 22 years with Wyeth, Johnson & Johnson, and Allergan. Her background includes expertise in strategic planning, financial analysis, marketing, and creating high-performance teams. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Iowa and her Master's of Arts from DePaul University of Chicago, and holds a Certified Ophthalmic Executive Certificate, a COE. In addition, she has completed extensive coursework in leadership, communication management, business, and strategic planning. And so with no further ado, I will go ahead and turn the floor over to you, Jill, for tonight's talk.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Eversight for inviting me to present this evening. I'm really excited to speak on this topic because it is one that I think is really important for ophthalmologists as they are entering the later stages of their career. So succession planning and physician recruitment, it's never too early to start. Sometimes it might be too late to start, so it's always good to plan ahead for sure. And even last week, I think I received at least 2 phone calls from ophthalmologists who were in their 70s and they were just starting to do some succession planning and try to figure out what the next stage is for them. So I'm excited to talk about this topic, and I certainly welcome any and all questions at the end as well. And let's see if it's going to change. There we go. So we're going to talk about reasons to start succession planning now, talk about some options that you have for a smooth transition. We'll talk about the hiring timeline for physician recruitment, assessing your hiring process, expectations and contract norms, and we'll finish up hopefully within about 30 minutes or so. So we definitely have an aging nation. Between 2015 and 2060, we are seeing a projected number of U.S. residents 65 years and older, nearly doubling. So along with this aging population means that we're going to see an increase in eye diseases, advanced AMD, glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, cataracts. We are seeing significant increases. So what does this tell us? We're definitely in the right business because there is going to be no shortage of patients for ophthalmologists. The challenge we have, however, in practices is that we definitely have a supply-demand issue. I am located in the Chicago area, and here in the Midwest, we have seen this supply-demand issue for many, many years. I think most residents and fellows seem to want to go out to the coast, the East Coast, the West Coast, or down south to Florida. But I think what we're seeing now, and you can see this from the graph here, is by region, every place is seeing a huge increase in demand. So whereas we used to have a surplus of ophthalmologists in the Northeast and the West, we're now seeing that we have a shortage because the demand has grown so much. So it is definitely making it more challenging to find ophthalmologists to fill these open positions. So some options for succession planning. If you're getting ready to retire or just take some more time off, whatever the case may be, you do have some options. These are probably four of the most common options that we've seen. You could hire an associate and groom them for a couple of years before having them start or become a partner or selling the practice to them directly. You could sell to or merge with another local practice. I've seen a few practices across the country who have had incredible success in doing this. In fact, there's one not too far from Chicago here, and they were able to merge optometric practices and ophthalmology practices into one beautiful state-of-the-art facility, and they've had incredible success there. You could sell to private equity or another corporate entity. And finally, number four is non-succession. Just close the doors when you're done and lock it up. For all of the top options here, the top three, you really need to start early. So plan ahead. I would say at least 1 to 5 years, maybe even up to 10 years, especially depending on the type of practice you have and your location as well. Number four, you probably don't need quite as much time to just close the door and lock it up, but you do need a little bit of time, a few months, just to make sure that you are transferring your patients and their patient care to another ophthalmologist. But ideally, you really want to look at kind of those top three options and what might work best for you. Do you need an OD or an MD? So oftentimes I go into practices and they're telling me that they do need another ophthalmologist to help them because they're so busy. These are some questions that you can start asking to figure out if you really do need another ophthalmologist in the practice or another optometrist instead. Um, I'd say for all of the questions on the left-hand side, if the answers are yes, then maybe an optometrist is the right choice. The questions on the right, especially this one that's highlighted in red, is the MD owner looking for a succession plan? If the answer to that question is yes, you probably need another ophthalmologist in the practice. If the answer to those questions on the right are no, then maybe you can add an optometrist to the practice. So it really depends on what your long-term goals are. How desirable is your practice? You know, as you're starting to recruit, I think you really need to start thinking about how desirable your practice is to those that you are trying to bring in, whether you're merging with another practice, whether you're recruiting for an ophthalmologist, or even selling to PE. As I am interviewing ophthalmologists who are searching for jobs, these are the things that they are asking for. Large multi-specialty practices. Generally speaking, the main reason why they're looking for a larger practice with other subspecialists there is really because, especially if they have some sort of a fellowship, they're hoping that they're not the only one with that fellowship. So oftentimes I'll speak with a glaucoma surgeon, a cornea surgeon, or even a retina surgeon. They want to make sure that there's somebody else in that subspecialty as well, so that if they ever run into a problem, they've got somebody there to help them through and to mentor them as well. Oftentimes, candidates are still asking for urban practices, private practices, plus an ASC, really because they are hoping to have some sort of a partnership opportunity. So partnership is still very important to young ophthalmologists. And I think over the years, some have thought that maybe that is less important, and a lot of ophthalmologists just want to be employees, but that is not what I'm seeing. I'd say probably 75% of young ophthalmologists are still asking for that partnership opportunity. I think the definition of partnership, though, might be a little bit different than it used to be 20, 30 years ago, when physicians were opening practices and really putting in their blood, sweat, and tears, working many hours trying to get their practice up off the ground. So more desirable practice really equals more candidates and lower salaries. If it's a less desirable practice or location, It could mean less candidates to choose from and higher salaries as well. So create an interviewing experience that makes candidates want to work in your practice and be a part of your amazing team. I just had the opportunity to speak with a young ophthalmologist who interviewed at a practice a few weeks ago, and the interviewing process was not ideal. Let's just put it that way. The candidate shared that there was no time that was carved out when they came in to interview at the practice, and they were just basically shadowing the physicians that were in the practice. There was no agenda that was given in advance. And also, they didn't know how long they were going to be in the office. They thought they were just coming in for a 1 or 2 hour interview, and they winded up being asked to stay for about 5 or 6 hours, and they were not given dinner or anything like that. So it was actually an unpleasant interviewing experience. So this is really the part where I think a lot of practices probably lose most of their candidates, is throughout that interviewing process. So you really want to make sure that you have that process in line, and we can talk more about that as well. So what does your hiring process look like? How quickly are you contacting candidates? Who speaks with the candidates first and for how long? How much time is going by between interactions or interviewing steps? If you have too much time that's going by between the interviewing process, oftentimes you'll lose those candidates because there are so many other opportunities for them to get interested in during that time. Make sure there's an agenda before their on-site visit. And when are you discussing compensation? Are you checking references? Some of these things you really want to make sure that you have a very tightened up interviewing and hiring process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Communication is key. Must call the candidate within 24 to 48 hours from the time he or she indicates interest in the position. If you are waiting for days on end, or if you're passing around their CV to the other physicians in the practice or to the managing partner, and a week has gone by, you've probably already lost that candidate because they've gone elsewhere. So really important to contact them within that 24 to 48 hours. Before their on-site visit, make sure you're providing an agenda at least 48 hours before their on-site visit, so they know exactly what to expect while they're there. And why? Because there's just too many opportunities available, as I mentioned earlier. Another thing that's absolutely imperative is to make sure that you have a positive online reputation. As I'm interviewing candidates, I can hear them clicking away because they are Googling the practice right away, trying to figure out what type of practice it is, what their image looks like online. So make sure you take a look at your practice online. Google, Facebook, health grades. Does your website represent your practice well? And what does your social media reflect about the practice? What can others really learn about that practice? And I think an important question is really to ask yourself, would you want to join a practice like that? So your online reputation is absolutely vital for recruiting not just physicians, but patients and employees too. So make sure that you have at least 4 stars. 5 stars is ideal, of course, but 60% of patients will not even consider visiting practice that's rated less than 4 stars online. So really make sure that you have the best reputation, because that's really the first impression that these candidates are looking at. Recruiting trend number 1, employer brand matters more than ever. After COVID, employees really are in the driver's seat. They're demanding flexibility, work-life balance, mental health benefits, and they're really looking at your website to see what your mission and your vision is. Your culture is important as well, but I think not so much on your website, but really on your social media platform. So make sure that you are really exhibiting your culture through Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, any of those social media platforms. That's the place where they're going to really learn about the culture of your practice. Having a strong employer brand is going to make the company stand out as a good employer and allows candidates to see their potential fit in the company. And that is becoming so important today, especially as we have a shortage of ophthalmologists because it's impossible to fill all the positions with the very few ophthalmologists that we have available. Be prepared to kiss a lot of frogs. I really put this in here just because they're really cute frogs, but I think it's really important to realize that you are probably going to have to interview multiple candidates for the position that you have. So be prepared. And always assume that your candidate is evaluating at least 4 to 6 other job offers. So that's another reason to kind of keep that process moving. Check out the candidates themselves. They're checking you out. You should probably be checking them out as well. So look at their online reviews, especially if they are established in a practice already. You could certainly look at their online reviews. You can check out the American Board of Ophthalmology and see if they're board eligible or board certified. And you can also check their references. And I do recommend asking for at least 3 to 5 references. You can ask for their attending as a reference, colleagues, nurses or technicians. I have a practice that always asks for nurses from the OR. And that's very helpful. And make sure that you're asking for these references and checking them before you are inviting candidates for an on-site visit, or at least before they do come for an on-site visit, because you are going to be paying for that on-site visit, for their travel, for their hotel, for meals. So you want to make sure that you are checking those references because that's an investment on your part in those candidates. In terms of the American Board of Ophthalmology, verify candidates on the website. 90% of ophthalmologists become board eligible, board certified. The requirements to be AB certified, ABO verifies training. There's a written exam. It's usually late September. There's an oral exam that's in June or October. And something that's somewhat new that I'm hearing just in the last couple weeks is that candidates must pass the board exam within 7 years of finishing residency. So in working with some young ophthalmologists who took 4 years of fellowship, and now they only have 3 years left to actually complete and pass the American board, because they've got to do it within the 7 years. So something that is somewhat new out there and can be a challenge, certainly. And then for foreign nationals, required to have a current and unrestricted license to practice in the US for 5 consecutive years, and then they can become board eligible after that time frame. These are some of the national base salary ranges that the healthcare group came out with a few years ago. They used to have kind of just one number, but the numbers are kind of all over the place. As we have a supply-demand issue, the numbers are going to continue to increase. Yes, this has been a few years. I love that they have easy hire, average hire, and tough hire. And in the past, I would say an easy hire would be someplace that's in a more urban area. A tough hire would be maybe a practice that's in a more rural area. These days in 2024, I would say that the vast majority of these base salaries are probably in that tough hire category. So most of the compensation rates are starting at that tough hire rate right there for each one of those specialties. And usually practices will offer a salary like that plus a production bonus as well. So these are some of the other benefits that practices will offer. These are the ones that are most common that I'm seeing in practices. So as I mentioned, the salary plus a production bonus. Usually that is 2.5 to 3 times the salary, and the bonus percentage is usually between 30% and 40% for ophthalmologists. Moving expense, the average is usually between $5,000 and $8,000. And a signing bonus, I've seen signing bonuses all over the place. It could be anywhere from $10,000. I've seen all the way up to $130,000, but I'd say the average is somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000. Vacation is usually about 3 to 4 weeks, along with a week for CME. And the non-compete is generally 2 years and 5 to 10 miles in urban areas and up to 50 miles in rural areas. Of course, there are some states that do not require the non-compete does not hold anymore. And that seems to be coming a little bit more popular, but there's still quite a few states, the vast majority still have some sort of a non-compete that will hold. Professional liability tail coverage is usually paid by the employee, but in some cases, practices will pay that, or they'll split it 50-50. And then termination usually requires a 60 to 90 day written notice as well. 90 days is probably the most common. The interviewing timeline, I just have this in here just because I think it's really important to stress how important it is to kind of expedite the decision making when you're interviewing. So it's really important to discuss the job offer and benefits at the on-site interview dinner. That way the candidate that you're interviewing knows you're moving in that direction. You really want them to join you in the practice. Extend that job offer as soon as you reach a collective agreement. Ideally, it's within a few days of that on-site interview, unless it's actually on that on-site interview. Send a letter of understanding to make sure everyone's on the same page and set a due date. I have seen practices over the years where they've sent out a letter of understanding or an employment agreement without any type of a due date or a deadline. And unfortunately, what winds up happening is sometimes the candidates have multiple job interviews and they kind of push that decision off, or they've already moved on to another opportunity without informing the practice they're no longer interested. So I think it's really important to have some sort of a due date. 7 to 10 days, 7 to 14 days is a reasonable amount of time, I think, to have somebody review that letter of understanding. Some practices have great success in not only sending the letter of understanding to a candidate, but then also scheduling a time to review it and to go through the details of that letter of understanding or even the employment agreement. And that usually gives the candidate an opportunity to ask questions and also to negotiate, and it makes them more comfortable negotiating and asking for what they want. So that can be a very successful strategy to make sure that you are getting the candidate that you're most interested in. But again, it's really important to kind of keep that process moving as much as you can. And finally, number 6, be flexible as well. So if a candidate is telling you that they do have some other interviews that they want to go on, they can't get an answer back to you within 7 to 10 days or 7 to 14 days, that's okay. Give them that extra time to make a decision because you want to make sure that they really want to join your practice. So here's a little hiring timeline. I wrote an article last year on how to hire an ophthalmologist in 30 days, and this is the timeline from it. And when I mean how to hire an ophthalmologist in 30 days, it doesn't mean that you've decided today I'm going to go out and hire an ophthalmologist for the practice, and in 30 days they're going to be starting. This is really in terms of the decision-making process and the interviewing process. So really day one is kind of the first time that you have a candidate that has expressed interest in your opportunity. Again, you want to contact them within 24 to 48 hours and start that interviewing process. Day 30 is really the time that you'd really like to have that signed agreement received from them. I have seen practices very successful in being able to have a candidate sign an agreement within 30 days. And it's because they've actually reviewed their interviewing process to make sure it is extremely efficient and that they're able to really get to know their candidate in a short amount of time. So this is it can absolutely be done, and you're more likely to be successful. So when it comes to interviewing, time is usually not your friend. So it's better to keep that process moving. So in summary, start early and determine a succession plan. Figure out if you want to sell your practice to private equity or to join with another group in the area or to hire an ophthalmologist to join you and hopefully become a partner or buy the practice. or if you're just planning to close the door. But start early and determine a succession plan. As I mentioned, if you can start at least 1 to 5 years in advance, that is very helpful. In some locations, you might want to start 10 years in advance because it might take that much time to find an ophthalmologist who would want to join the practice and who's interested in buying the practice as well. Begin a physician search sooner rather than later. Prepare your online image. Make sure that you have the best online image you can get. And that is making sure that you have positive reviews and a great image in terms of your social media on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and things like that. Stay open-minded about every possible candidate. You never want to kind of turn down a candidate before you've had a chance to really have a conversation and get to know them. Sometimes the resumes or the CVs are not exactly what you're looking for, but when you meet the candidate, you find that they are maybe a perfect fit. So make sure you keep an open mind about every possible candidate. And quite frankly, in some practices, it might be just one candidate they have to choose from in a year's time frame. So another reason. Follow up in a timely fashion. Make sure you're keeping that interviewing process moving at all times, because again, if there's a week or 2 weeks goes by, that candidate has probably moved on to other opportunities. So always have that next step scheduled in the calendar. Introduce the candidate to the managing partner immediately. I worked with a practice years ago, and it was actually a small private practice, solo practitioner, and the administrator was interviewing candidates. And after every interview, the candidates never wanted to move on to the next part of the process, which would be meeting with the solo owner of the practice. And she couldn't figure out why. And so when we started asking a few questions, we realized that she was spending about an hour to an hour and a half with each candidate. And I have no idea what was said during that hour to an hour and a half. But when we shortened her conversation to 10 minutes and asked her to limit the next phone interview to 10 minutes, the very next physician that she interviewed winded up meeting with the solo owner of the practice, and they winded up hiring him. So sometimes it's really important to just get those candidates to the managing partner so they can have kind of a clinical discussion and talk about what the day-to-day really looks like for them. Make the offer desirable, but leave room to negotiate. Make sure you really understand what a desirable offer looks like. That's why it's always helpful too sometimes to have a third party, so that when you're getting ready to make that offer, that third party can kind of gather more information and tell you what they're looking for to make sure that they will be hired. And then prepare the practice. Make sure you have ample time to credential, train, and transition the new physician. Ideally, it's great to have somebody sign an employment agreement at least 4 to 6 months before they start in the practice, because that gives you enough time to really prepare the practice. And finally, good luck. It's certainly a challenge out there, but it can be done. And I think making sure that your interviewing process is really buttoned up makes a huge difference. So just a couple of words of wisdom. I'm sure many of you have read some of the books by Jack Welch, but before you are a leader, success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others. That's the time that you really want to bring on those young ophthalmologists and start grooming them and showing them the way so that they can eventually be your succession plan and take over the practice. A successful succession plan enables growth and continuity. And that's really the ideal. So thank you very much. I was very efficient there, Mike.
I would agree. You were very efficient, almost exactly the 30 minutes that you
I
stayed.
know.
Thank you so much, Jill. I appreciate you taking the time tonight to talk with our audience here. And we have both some senior and some young ophthalmologists on the call here today.
Great.
Comment, great presentation from one of the audience. And we now have time to ask and answer questions. So I would encourage anyone who has a question to enter that into the chat. Now we have Jill here, sort of captive to answer your questions. And I'll start this off with I have a question. So we talked a lot about you talked a lot about the interviewing process and sort of that route of succession planning. I'm curious about the sale route. So if someone was interested in selling a practice or getting involved with private equity potentially or selling to another practice, how would they go about starting that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I would say the most important thing is to really figure out what your value is, what the practice value is. So, the first thing that I would probably do if you were interested in that, rather than hiring a physician to join, even if you were hiring a physician to join your practice, you really want to know what the value of your practice is. No matter what. So I would actually start by doing a valuation of the practice. Sometimes accountants can do that. I know that there are healthcare consultants out there that can do it, but make sure that you get a valuation of your practice so that you truly know the value of it. And also make sure you have a good team on your side, whether it's a practice consultant, an accountant, an attorney, really kind of gather your troops, if you will, and have a team that can help you through that process.
Thank you. We do have a question from one of our audience members as well. Uh,
Mhm.
so first, thank you, Jill, for the talk. This is from our question. How would you approach a senior ophthalmologist to start succession planning if it's not currently on their radar?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. Yes, and I would say that's probably very common too. I think it depends on your relationship with that senior doctor in the practice. Oftentimes, maybe people are not ready to talk about what their succession plan is, but it's obviously an important thing because it's going to happen one day, no matter what. So I think you really just have to have an open, honest conversation and find out what that succession plan looks like. And it could be that they haven't really thought about it much. And so sometimes just asking the questions and having an open and honest conversation can get them to start thinking about it. Especially if it's a solo practitioner. Sometimes they don't realize that they really need you to kind of help them through that process as well, because it's not always easy.
So be a good friend and be open and honest.
That's right, open and honest conversation.
Yeah, that's good advice for many, many things.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And I want to ask one more question. We don't have any more in the chat right now, but we do have a couple of younger ophthalmologists on the call. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, from what you have seen, aside from compensation, what would you say is the most important to young ophthalmologists who are hunting for jobs today?
Yeah, so a lot of the young ophthalmologists that I'm interviewing are really looking for a mentor. So, if there are some established ophthalmologists on this call today, I highly recommend really thinking about how important that is for young ophthalmologists to have some sort of a mentor in the practice. So, oftentimes when they're interviewing with practices, they're really looking for that same type of mentorship that they had when they were in residency or fellowship, to kind of help them through the process, because it is a little bit scary starting out in a practice and seeing patients on your own and not really having anybody there to guide you. So I'd say that most of the young ophthalmologists that I talk to are really looking for somebody who can mentor them as they get started in practice.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. I agree. Oh, we have more questions coming in. Oh, perfect. Okay, so we have what if optometrists in an ophthalmology owned practice want to become a partner?
Oh my gosh, I can't believe you just asked that question. I don't know who asked that, but that's a great question. And it's funny because I was going to share a story and I forgot to share it, but I've actually been working with an ophthalmologist who's well established and who's trying to figure out a succession plan for her practice. And they keep hiring ophthalmologists who have no interest in partnership or in taking over the practice. But the two owners of the practice are getting older and getting ready to slow down or retire, whatever the case may be. They're not doing surgery anymore. And so they're really trying to find somebody to take over this practice. And their optometrist that works for them really wants that. And so I keep encouraging this practice to really consider selling the practice to the optometrist. And that way it really kind of continues that continuity of care for all of their patients. It's really the best answer for this practice. It depends on the state. Some states you can be partners with MDs and ODs, and some restrict that. I think for their case, it might be a little bit easier because I think they would just sell it to an optometrist and it would not be an issue. But absolutely, that's a great option.
That's a good case study.
Yeah.
And we have one more question. And this is an interesting one. So what would you say to someone if the salaries that are needed to attract another ophthalmologist are just impossible or out of reach for a small rural solo practice?
Yeah. And that is certainly becoming the case these days, unfortunately. The hard part for a small rural practice is that you have to have a high number usually to find the right person. And that's getting harder and harder to do as these numbers continue to go up. So some of the rural practices, I mean, I have some rural practices who have been looking for 10 plus years to find an ophthalmologist to join them. If you can find somebody who's local in the area and invest in them to go on and become an ophthalmologist, do their residency and their fellowship, and invest in them early on, hoping they're going to come back to the area, that's usually where practices are most successful, but it's hard to find that person, right? So in some cases, practices are doing just what I had mentioned in terms of optometrists, having the optometrist purchase the practice, and really have that as kind of the future of the practice as opposed to ophthalmology.
Hmm. Yes, it's the landscape is getting tough for definitely for
It
the
is. You know, the other thing too that some rural practices are doing too that I'm seeing is that the local hospitals sometimes will partner with ophthalmology practices and help subsidize that starting salary. So that is another option that I have seen work pretty well, as well. So that's another option that I would definitely look into.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill. We're done with questions in the chat right now. So unless anything comes in the next 2 or 3 seconds, I think we'll wrap it up for the night. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us today.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you to everyone who logged in tonight. Every webinar needs an audience. When you log out of the webinar, the participants, you will see you'll get a link to a very brief survey, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Do you have any closing words for our audience tonight, Jill?
My only closing words, I guess, are start early. Start succession planning now. Don't wait until years go by. Make sure you start as early as possible, and way you'll make sure that you achieve exactly what you're looking for.
Start early and open, honest conversations with your friends who haven't started yet.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much for inviting me today.
Thank you all. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.